You know, for the longest time, we thought that newborns were relatively helpless, that they really didn't have much in the way of abilities, if you will. They had instincts, and this is one of those places where instincts actually do show up and are oftentimes shed as learning takes over, and obviously the genetic code begins to develop the little one faster and faster. But what we have found out within recent decades, actually, is that newborns are actually quite competent. One of the examples of an instinct in newborns is something that we refer to as the Babinski Reflex. And the Babinski Reflex, it's kind of hard to say, but is oftentimes an indicator of development. And essentially it occurs when the big toe moves toward the top surface, so it points up of the foot, and then the other toes fan out after the sole of the foot has been stroked. And you'll see this in infants and in newborns. If you've ever been near one or been around one where their feet are exposed, try it sometime. You can just stroke the bottom of their foot, and their little foot will, their toes will splay out, and their big toe will push forward toward the back of their foot. And that was described early, and it tells us a little bit of their physiological development, but it's an interesting aspect of newborns that we would refer to as an instinct. It's pre-programmed, it's not learned. With learning and other development, it's not as pronounced in adults, but it's a good example. Another one is the rooting reflex. Essentially, the newborn, when their cheek is stroked, they turn toward anticipating the nipple for feeding. And so the rooting reflex is one of those examples that is, again, programmed in, if you will. Now, ultimately, these are just a few examples of the sensory equipment and reflexes that the primary focal point of this is facilitating interaction with their caregivers. I mean, that's one way to look at it. We can say survival as well, but facilitating interaction with the people that are taking care of them, and essentially securing nourishment. Other reflexes that we could include in here is sucking. A little one doesn't really have to be taught how to suck. Swallowing, breathing, all of these are part of the wiring that a little one is actually born with. The interesting thing is these three are all part of the feeding process. The minute that a little one's mouth attaches to the mom's nipple, they begin to suck and swallow and breathe all at the same time, very rhythmically, actually. And these are all part of securing the nourishment that they need. The other one is turning their heads toward the human voice. It is an automatic, and it's very much a part of, again, like I said, facilitating interaction, but they don't turn toward anyone else's voice or a dog or whatever, but they do tend to gaze and look at and turn their heads toward the human voice. Another example of a reflex would be how or what objects they look at. Looking at objects, they gaze at most intently about 8 to 12 inches away from their face. And obviously, this is about the distance from between a nursing infant's eyes and the mother's. And that's one of those aspects that if it's outside of their visual range, they lose interest in it because they are driven by novelty and change, and gazing at something is one of those ways that we actually can determine their preference, if you will. The last one here is how the newborn will distinguish or identify the mom's distinctive odor, if you want to put it that way. And so distinguish odor and voice timbre. Interestingly enough, infants, when you listen to them, depending on their culture, when you listen to them cry, their intonation and action of crying matches the same intonations of the language in which they were born. And that's another indication, if you will, of a reflex. They're given the basic wiring to be able to survive. Another one, which still persists into adulthood, is the idea of habituation. They can habituate. In other words, after there's a decrease in responding with repeated stimulation. When we use that, this is all built into most of us. You put your hand into a warm glass of water or a pan of water. Initially, it feels really warm, and then it feels cooler and cooler. Well, technically, the temperature of the water hasn't really decreased, but you've become habituated to that water, and therefore your nerve endings are not firing any longer. Essentially, when we're doing research with infants, we pay attention to, which is part of this process, is their visual preference. And when we do, the idea here is that their visual preference gives us an idea of what grabs their attention and what they like and don't like. And one of the interesting things about visual preference is, for one, the human face. They look at a face first, and that's so. If you were to show a infant a face that was configured like this, they would be more prone to look at this one than if you put it configured like this. Now, it's the same configuration of dots, but they focus on this one more, which suggests their preference, which is more like the human face than this one down here. And that's very much a part of our research in understanding newborns and their competency.